and a dramatic day yesterday of continued testimony in the Karen Reed trial. Joining us now to discuss that for a little bit is our official correspondent, Ted Daniel of Boston 25. Good morning, Ted.
Good morning. Everybody ready for round two today?
Was that the most, in your mind, the most anticipated day of testimony, the cross-examination of Jen McCabe?
Yeah, and it was everything that it was billed. I mean, it was about as contentious as you could possibly get between Alan Jackson and Jen McCabe, back and forth, interrupting each other, trying to get one line in or another, and it was fire for for like 4 hours straight.
I had seen a report that John O'Keefe's father had gotten up during that testimony and left court. Did you see that?
I didn't see him during that testimony, but I've seen him get up before and walk out. So
Okay.
I can't say if it's anything related to what's being said on the stand. But, I mean, and I think we got to take a second and think about that family sitting there through all of this. I mean, it's for us, we're reporting on it. It's extremely interesting, a lot going on in this case. But, they're every single day, and there's been some really tough things that have, obviously have to come up in this trial. And, it's tough for them.
Yeah.
Ted, it was interesting to me that Jackson brought up the recording of Jen McCabe after her 911 call. It seems like Karen Reed left a phone in there after trying to call John O'Keefe, and the voicemail picked up what was going on in the car. He brought it up. We heard it in court. It was muffled, but then there was no real questioning after that. Do you expect that he is going to go back to that and tie it all in?
He's just been slicing away on, there's so many little elements. There are so many things in this case, and especially with Jen McCabe's involvement, where there are questions and sort of inconsistencies. I think that's certainly one of them. The way that worked was, right, that there was a phone call placed to John O'Keefe, and it obviously went to his voicemail, and it happened at the same time that Jen McCabe was making the 911 call, and they're in the car. And it was tough, and it was muffled for me. He asked her a number of questions about that call. I'm not exactly sure what the end game outside of what was on that call is, but it's certainly something that, they wanted the jury to hear.
It seems like there is a serious butt dial issue in Canton. Can anything be done about that?
I mean, it was Brian Higgins, and Brian Albert, their butt dials at 2:22 in the morning. And then yesterday we learned, this is kind of interesting, and this is something that I do know the end game on this, the reason why Jackson brought that up. So between 12:29 and 12:50, according to the defense, there were 6 calls from Jen McCabe's phone to John O'Keefe's phone. And I think what the defense is trying to get to there is they're suggesting that, because their theory is that O'Keefe went into the house, was beaten up in the house, is that maybe John O'Keefe's phone went missing during all of that. And they're suggesting that those calls were placed to find the phone, that they're frantically looking for his phone. And that's why you have 6 calls in like a really quick succession.
It was very, very dramatic.
Can I ask one question real quick, Ted? It seemed like, based on listening to Courtney and Greg and Curtis talk about this case, the defense angle is show the inaccuracies as far as with the witnesses and lying and kind of, that direction. What is the prosecution doing? Because I never hear them ever talking about, well, the prosecution had a good day. What's their angle to show that it was Karen Reed who did this?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially the prosecution usually takes a fourth. In this trial, it's usually like a fourth of the time of the witness, and the defense takes the rest of it. And I think the prosecution wants to get ahead of a lot of the things that the defense will bring up, so they will ask the same questions of stuff that might come up later and get the answer that the prosecution, wants to hear. But I mean, I think you have all these people. You have, for this conspiracy to be, to be true, you would have to have, more than a dozen people involved in it. You would have to have law enforcement, first responders, and all these civilian witnesses tied in telling sort of the same stories. So I think that's what the prosecution's trying to do is you're saying, hey, you're hearing over and over from all these people who are implicating Karen Reed. And I think what the prosecution is hoping is at the end, the jury will say, no, I don't think every single one of these people lied to me.
Ted, I flipped back yesterday. I've been vacillating. I have some people in law enforcement that had me convinced over the weekend that the prosecution has this case. Jen McCabe's cross-examination yesterday had me going back. Is there a way with discovery that the defense attorneys can see just how many calls these people made at the times of these butt dials on previous nights? Because wouldn't that be the easiest thing to prove? Like, you've never had a butt dial at 2 a.m., but you happen to have it on the night this body was found in front of your house.
They only get windows for what because essentially it's pretty invasive, right, to grab somebody's phone records, and you're going to need a court order or subpoena. And so, no, they don't. Usually it's a scope, right? It's from this date to this date. So they aren't able to get that.
What was the reaction of the jurors when Alan Jackson was cross-examining Jen McCabe yesterday regarding those 6 calls to John O'Keefe?
I didn't see the jury necessarily she would look towards them as she answered. Her and Brian Albert both did that. They kind of pivot to the jury. And I never saw the jury actually kind of, locked in on her as she was talking. They would, of course, as she would give the answer, they would stare at her, but then they'd go immediately back to Jackson. I didn't hear any sighs or outright, see any outright reaction. But I mean, I think that's, to me, that was and Jackson brought that up. She said that during previous testimony in her state grand jury testimony, that was the butt dial thing. And it just seems like that one and dozens of other ones, it's going to be something that the jury's going to have to reconcile.
There were a couple things that were brought up yesterday, which I had yet to hear, and I'm clearly somewhat obsessed and addicted. So one of those was the meeting that occurred at the home of Sergeant Lank. The other one was the presence of Kevin Albert at the home of Brian Albert shortly afterward. Are those things that it would appear came from the FBI because they are just appearing now?
Yeah, the FBI or some other source, because I hadn't heard those either until yesterday. Those were brand new. So they're saying that, the day after John O'Keefe's death, Jen McCabe and her friend Carrie Roberts goes to Lieutenant Lank's house. They're there for about an hour. Jen McCabe says the only reason why they went there is because Carrie's daughter is friends with the Lank's daughter, and that they really never went into the house, and they just spoke to Lieutenant Lank's wife. That was her testimony. And so you also had this meeting that Jen McCabe had a couple of weeks ago at the DA's office. And, once the door was opened, I think it was Jen McCabe who opened that door, then Alan Jackson used, the next 10 minutes to ask her, hey, who was at that meeting? What kind of questions were asked? And so I think Jackson is trying to get to the point that, hey, the DA's prepping all these people, that they're having these long conversations, before they come in and testify. Whether that's true or not, that's the inference that Jackson's trying to make.
Why would officials allow McCabe to be able to delete the text messages between she and her daughters? Because Allie McCabe, we now know, was the one to pick up Colin Albert from the house. Why would they ever allow her to do that? What would be the reasoning behind that?
That's a good question. As we've seen through the trial, the McCabes and the Alberts are pretty tied in to the Canton Police Department, and of course the defense has said that they're also tied in with Michael Proctor, the lead state police investigator. This was different. This was not Jen McCabe getting her phone seized. This was Jen McCabe who says she voluntarily handed over her phone to police. So I don't even think they had a warrant for it at the time. She's giving it to them, and the decision was made that okay, you can wipe the personal text. That's what she said, personal text with her daughter.
So today, the cross will continue when it comes to Jen McCabe, and I'm guessing that maybe we'll hear about some kind of a butt Google that happened at 2:27 a.m.
Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet. I think probably Jackson might be leaving that till the end. Of course, that was kind of what broke this case wide open back in April, 2022 or 23. It was a motion from Yannetti that said, essentially, we just discovered that this prosecution witness at 2:27 a.m. Googled how long to die in cold. That doesn't make sense because this is the same prosecution witness who calls 911 at 6:30 and says, hey, we just found the body. So, of course, Jen McCabe and the prosecution says no, that was in what's called she did the Google search, but she did it at the request of Karen Reed after the body was found. And she had a tab on her iPhone that was already open. She re-accessed that tab. And so it shows at 2:27 in the morning, but it was actually much later in the day. So that's going to be interesting. The jury hasn't heard that yet, and they're probably going to get that today.
All right, and then final one from me. Have you heard any speculation? There's only one day of trial next week. Is it possible that there are some kind of plea negotiations going on, and that's why there's only one day of trial next week?
No, I don't think that's the case. That would absolutely blow my mind if that were to happen. I've seen people put that out on Twitter. I think it is likely more having to do with scheduling, and I know one of the jurors was told had a graduation event that they had I told everybody out in advance, and that's why we didn't have court on Monday. So I'd be blown away if that's the reason why we're not having a lot of court next week.
Ted, as always, thank you for taking the time with us this morning, and enjoy it today. As Courtney would say, I think it's going to be electric over there at 9 o'clock today.
Absolutely. All right, guys. I'll talk to you soon.